Good morning, everyone. In this week's Torah portion, the father-in-law of Moses joins him in the desert. And he sees the way Moses is single-handedly resolving all the questions and disputations amongst the Jewish people. And he says to his son-in-law, what you're doing is not good. First of all, you're going to get burnt out. From morning to night, you're answering questions. And second of all, it's not fair for the nation to have to wait all day to ask you a question. And he recommends that he creates a judicial system, very similar to what we have today, where there'll be lower courts and higher courts. And as the more difficult questions rise up in the higher courts, only the most complex matters will be brought to Moses' attention. And if Moses can't answer it, he will ask God. And Moses implements his father-in-law's recommendation. But when his father-in-law advises him, he says, you should appoint judges that have the following four criteria. Number one, they should be men of accomplishment. Number two, they should be God-fearing. Number three, they should be men of truth. And number four, they should despise money, so they're uncorruptible. And Moses takes his father-in-law's advice. But then the Torah says he chose men who were of accomplishment. Only the first criteria. And the question is, what about God-fearing? What about men of truth? What about people who despise money? And one answer is that what Moses was saying was, we know who men of accomplishment are. We could see if a person has done good deeds and accomplished great things. But who really knows if someone's truly God-fearing? Who knows if someone really has integrity and truth? Who really knows if somebody really despises money? As the verse says, man can see with their eyes, but only God can see into the heart of another. When the Jewish people arrived at Mount Sinai, the Torah says they rested as one person with one heart facing the mountain. And our rabbis say that God gave the Torah to the Jewish people in the merit of their unity. It was only when they were as one, with one heart, as one person, God gave them the Torah. Because God is saying that the prerequisite to receiving the Torah is unity. When we see division amongst Jews, especially today in Israel, we have to remember that we only received the Torah as a nation when we showed that we were as one, unified. And we should never judge one another, because we may think a person is very God-fearing and they may not be so God-fearing. Only God knows. And we may think someone else is not God-fearing or is not a person of integrity, and they may very well be. And so therefore it's not our job to judge. Our job is to love every single person unconditionally, because only God knows who is truly righteous. There's a story about this told by this man who, unfortunately, his family member was in the hospital. And you know, every hospital has a chapel. But in Israel, every hospital has a synagogue. And Yom Kippur came. And of course, there were services in the hospital chapel in Hadassah Hospital. And all the people who had family members in the hospital came to pray on Yom Kippur. And they all came into the chapel at the hospital for Kol Nidre. Now you can imagine, there were Jews with streimels, the fur hats. There were Jews with black hats. There were Jews with knitted kippot. And there were Jews who didn't even have a kippah. They had to be given a kippah to put on their head. But they all prayed Kol Nidre together. And you can imagine how heartfelt it was, because they were all praying for their loved ones in the hospital. And then they came back in the morning to pray the morning service and the Musaf service. And then they took a little break and they were fasting all together, and they came back for the mincha. And then finally they came to the opening of the ark for the very last service of Yom Kippur, Ne'ilah. And a man with a big fur shtreimel, a Hasidic Jew, stood up in front of the congregation in Hadassah Hospital. And he said, I want you to look around. He says, do you think there's one other synagogue in Israel today, or anywhere in the world, that looks like this? Where you could walk in and see every type of Jew, the one with the shtreimel, the fur hat, the one with the black hat, the one with the knitted kippah, the one who doesn't even have a kippah of his own. He says, we're here together and we prayed with so much love and so much feeling and so much unity, because we realize we're all one. And we're all praying for our loved ones to recover. He said, God willing, all of our loved ones will recover and will go home. But I want to remember this image every day of the year. To always remember that we should never look at another Jew as less, or not as worthy, or not as observant, or not as righteous. Only God knows someone's true inner worth. Our job is to stand together, regardless of what kind of a Jew what we practice, what denomination, what faith. Doesn't matter, Orthodox, Conservative, Reform, Reconstructionist, religious, not religious, Sephardic, Ashkenazic, Hasidic, Misnagid, Modern Orthodox, non-religious. Let us stand as we stood before Mount Sinai, as one person with one heart. Shabbat Shalom.